So for a planet to be truly habitable, it must simultaneously reside in the liquid water habitable zone and the ultraviolet habitable zone. And of these 14 known planetary, we've discovered 14 so far. We seem to be picking up one every year. But of all the planets that we discovered, and there's now 5,300 that we know of, we've yet to find one besides planet Earth that exists in even 3 of the 14 known planetary habitable zones.
We'll kick those tires and start that virtually fake fire. I love starting shows off with a feeling of inadequacy because, as you campers know, I have a very cool set, but I'm not in that very cool set today. But you know who is in a very cool set? The certified smarty pants over here in what appears to be one of the more aesthetically appealing studios we have. There are 3 Rosses that are very famous in my purview of contacts. Ross Geller from Friends, Bob Ross, and my favorite Ross of them all, Dr. Hugh Ross, who is here virtually with us today to try and make sense of this crazy thing we call life and the universe. He has a PhD in astronomy. He is actually also a preacher and teacher. And when I said smarty pants, I don't know what pants he's wearing, but they make him very smart. So please welcome to the program, Dr. Hugh Ross. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. I hope the introduction probably didn't do you justice, but you've also written, I know you're working your way up to 66 books, right? So there can be a canon of Ross.
I'm only on my 23rd book.
Okay. So we have some time to go. Okay. But there's so many questions I want to get into, and especially it's not often that I get to go camping virtually with an astronomer. So I want to start off just right out of the gate. Right now, it seems like there is this pervasive assumption that faith, Christianity, we'll call it any sort of just, religious thought and trying to reconcile it with science is just nonsense. And that there's as much evidence for this is a trope I hear a lot of times. There's as much evidence for faith and Christianity in particular as there's the flying spaghetti monster. But from reading your books, it sounds like there's a lot of mystery and things we don't know. So I would love to ask you out of the gate here, despite these brilliant minds like yourself working on it, what do we not have explanations for right now? What's still the mystery here that we actually have no idea what's going on?
Well, we do know that the universe is dominated by dark energy and dark matter, but we don't know what is the cause of the dark matter and the dark energy. We know there has to be massive particles behind dark matter, but we've not been able to detect them yet. We know they're very difficult, but that's one of the quests we astronomers have. We also want to know, is dark energy governed by one constant or 2 or 3 constants? So those are the kind of the big questions that astronomers are pursuing right now. They also want to know what the firstborn stars look like. Our theory, Big Bang creation model, tells us what they look like, but it'd be great to actually observe that and actually establish that the Big Bang got it right on that thing. I mean, it's gotten it right on everything else we can test. That's the one thing that remains to be tested.
Okay. So actually, and I want to even drill this down even a few layers simpler for minds like myself here. Right now, and I'd like to talk in terms of consensus. So this Big Bang, this thing that just happened, science seems to be probabilities, not things that we can know 1,000%, but these seem to be probabilities. So is the consensus right now among your peer set, is the Big Bang essentially, that is the working theory that has worked out well so far in all our equations? Is that sort of the overall consensus as far as the origins of our known universe?
Yeah, it's very much the consensus to such a degree that the debate has moved from whether or not our universe arose from a Big Bang creation event to what kind of Big Bang creation event. And it's actually gone down another level. Okay, we know it's a hot Big Bang creation model dominated by dark energy and dark matter. Now they're looking at subsets of that. So it just shows you how much strong the scientific evidence is for the Big Bang creation event, that we're now debating the sophisticated tiny details of the Big Bang as opposed to whether or not it actually happened.
So, and even just again, just to drill down on this, when we talk about a Big Bang, I mean, before there was a Big Bang, I mean, do we actually know what there was? Because I know in many of these debates about, religion or evolution or whatever, there is this, how can something come from nothing? But this Big Bang is a concept. Pardon my naivete here, but is the science that there was nothing and then, or there was compressed matter and then something exploded? What is the actual, for us lay people, if we really break it down, what was pre-Big Bang and then what caused it and what happened?
Well, today we have over 30 space-time theorems. And these theorems are true under two conditions. Number one, the universe must contain mass. But you and I and everybody else on planet Earth is living evidence that the universe indeed does contain mass. Some of us a little more so than others. And then the second condition is that general relativity describes the dynamics, the movements of bodies in the universe. And we astronomers have been able to prove that now to better than 16 places of the decimal. Based on those two conditions, we have theorems that prove that not only does the universe have a beginning, space and time have a beginning. Space and time were created when the universe came into existence, which establishes there must exist a causal agent for the universe that transcends matter, energy, space, and time. And this is a significant factor in my becoming a follower of Jesus Christ. Looking at the religions, different religions of the world, and realizing the Bible is the one holy book that explicitly states there's a beginning to space and time. There's a God that's free to operate completely independent of space and time.
It's almost, is there any theory of, so if time has a beginning before the Big Bang, is this sort of like a concept where we just have no idea what would exist prior to that? I mean, if we really go back to the Big Bang, is everything compressed? And again, it's been a few years since my physics class, but is there just a universe that's sort of compressed, and then all of a sudden this causal agent causes this eruption into this known universe at the beginning of time, and this causal agent started that? Do we have any theories or idea what would exist pre-Big Bang?
Well, our astronomical observations give us a detailed picture of the past history of the universe, all the way back to 100 billionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second after the creation event. And what it tells us is that the universe started off either infinitely or near infinitely compressed volume. And the universe was created with the property of ongoing expansion. So it started off infinitesimally small, nearly infinitely hot, and has been expanding and cooling down ever since in a highly predictable way. And we have measurements that of the past temperature of the universe that are 100% consistent with the predictions of the Big Bang creation model.
Interesting. I know. Sometimes I wonder, since it seems like the people who can do these sort of mathematics and engage in this are counting on us never being able to check y'all's math. So I'm going to take your when you mentioned how many decimal points, I'm going, you guys can handle it. I'll let the astrophysicists work on that. For you and your colleagues, and just the consensus in the scientific community when studying cosmology, astronomy, astrophysics, I'm curious. Is there a sense of, I feel like there's a narrative that the smartest people and the smartest scientists are completely antagonistic towards, a one faith or the other. Can you speak to that as people who study something that is by definition, in some cases very abstract and hard for us to understand? Does that sense of wonder and the fact that why we exist at all, does that creep into some of the colleagues and peers that you see? And can you speak to that narrative that the smartest people say that God is completely incompatible with what we know about the origins of the universe?
Well, all the way back in 1915, a group of philosophers did a survey of research scientists in America and discovered on average 45% of them believed in God and an afterlife. But they made the prediction, because they were atheists, and saying, as science advances, that percentage is going to plummet and go to zero. Well, they repeated that same survey in 1996 and got the same numbers. 45% believe in a God and afterlife amongst American research scientists. But they went a little deeper than that. And what they discovered is that in the physical sciences, you have a much higher level of belief than you do in the life sciences, and a much higher level of belief in the life sciences than you do in the social sciences. So, for example, amongst research mathematicians, about 80% believe. Amongst physical chemists, it's about 60%. Physicists and astronomers, it's running around 50%. But if you were to go to cultural anthropologists, it's down around 1%.
Interesting. So it seems like the broader you go with your view, the more it seems the numbers show that they're more open to theism in general, the more, I guess, macro your study gets when it comes to the universe.
I think there's a different explanation.
Okay.
Physical sciences, we're able to make measurements with a lot more precision. We know what the error bars are. We know not only the statistical errors, but the systematic errors. Whereas you go into the life and the social sciences, often we have no idea what the systematic errors are, and with great difficulty even trying to estimate the statistical errors. And so I think people take advantage of that great uncertainty and say, well, maybe there's not a God behind this. But when you're in physics and chemistry and astronomy, we've got these measurements that are highly precise and very consistent, which basically doesn't allow you a lot of wiggle room. I mean, for example, in the early part of the 20th century, people were realizing, wow, our measurements of galaxies show us that the universe has a beginning. And the atheists said, we can't handle this. We got to find some way to get rid of this Big Bang model for the universe. But the harder they tried to get rid of it, the more the evidence compelled them this really is the true state of the universe. And so today we have overwhelming evidence that indeed the universe arose from a Big Bang creation event. And hey, that has theological implications. It means there must be a God beyond space and time, but the evidence compels us to that position. So I think that's one reason why we see more mathematicians, physicists, and astronomers believing in God than people, for example, who are not even aware of these events in their discipline.
And so folks who maybe don't subscribe to a theistic view, because obviously you get to a point where you can't prove any of this, like beyond what caused the Big Bang. I know for some might seem like a, well, ridiculous question, because we can't prove it. But for colleagues and folks that you know who maybe don't subscribe to your particular theological worldview, is there still a sense of wonder of like we discover these constants, this fine tuning, and then they just sort of live in the I don't know, like I do, because to me, when I start getting into quantum theory and astrophysics, my mind is continually blown. And I want to get to your book where I did not realize that there were 11 theorized dimensions. I'm having a tough enough time with the 4 that I kind of reside in, in general. But do you find there's a sense of, for those who maybe don't subscribe to a theological worldview of yours, that they still have this, is there this sense of wonder and amazement when we study the universe and its origins?
Well, what I'm seeing amongst my peers who are not theistic in the worldview, they will acknowledge that the universe has a beginning, and that implies some kind of deistic cause. That the leading atheists are basically saying we can't take deism off the scientific table. And then they look at the fine tuning. But what I notice in their writings is they only look at the fine tuning on the scale of the universe as a whole and the laws of physics, which allows them to put the causal agent at a really long arm's length distance. And what I've been writing at Reasons to Believe is we not only see fine tuning on a cosmic scale, we see it on every size scale. We see it in our galaxy cluster, our galaxy. We see in our star, our planetary system, our systems of comets and asteroids, the interior of the Earth. On every possible size scale, we see this overwhelming evidence that has been fine-tuned. It's been designed to make the existence of human beings possible here on planet Earth. And when you get down to planet Earth, now suddenly this causal agent is getting close up. And people who don't like the idea of a personal God are naturally going to try to push away that. So they'd rather not look at that evidence. But there's one reason why in my books, I've been very forthright in saying this evidence is real. As much as we see fine tuning the universe, we see orders of magnitude greater fine tuning in our galaxy and our planetary system and the interior features of the Earth. And this does have profound philosophical and theistic implications that every human being needs to pay attention to.
Okay, that's great. So I want to pin that down. So even the most avowed, we'll say, antagonistic colleague of yours to this particular worldview, what concessions would folks who don't share your worldview have to make right now? And so it sounds like one of them is that there's something that caused the universe. We don't know. We can't prove what it was, but something did this. And as a general rule, from what we observe, things don't just come from nothing.
Right. And that something is a causal agent beyond space-time, matter, and energy. So we got a consensus there. There's also a consensus, and we look at the laws of physics and the gross features of the universe, we see overwhelming evidence. Paul Davies wrote this in his book, The Cosmic Blueprint, as an agnostic. He says, when we look at the universe as a whole, we see overwhelming evidence that has been designed for our existence. So this is where too, you also find a consensus. But it's when you get close to planet Earth that suddenly you get this debate where they say, well, is Earth really the only planet that has these characteristics? Is our galaxy the only one? And as I say, the typical response is, let's just not look at that. But I think we have to look at it.
So actually, I'd love, because that's the famous Jodie Foster line in the film Contact. Is there life out there? It's like, well, if not, it'd be an awfully big waste of space. They say at the end of the film. But so we're able.
Carl Sagan as a professor.
That's why I brought that up. I know you did.
And he made that comment. And I've written in 2 of my books is the universe must be precisely the size that it is, the mass that it is, to within 1 part in a quadrillion to have any kind of life in the universe. It's not wasted space. It's not wasted time. It's exactly what we need for life to be possible within this universe. The whole universe, as big as it is, must be exactly the size, the mass, and the age that it is for you and I to be able to have this conversation.
And so when we talk about that, how do we know that? And then 2, because at a smaller level, I've heard it said that, Earth only works because we've got other planetary masses that can, for example, absorb objects flying through space. Our moon is the exact distance it needs to be to help normalize our tidal patterns and gravity. Our sun is the perfect size. We're the perfect distance. I mean, there's awful lot of coincidences for this to work. And then it seems like the usual lay refrain to that would be, well, the universe is so big, though, the odds are similar to evolution, right? Just give enough time and enough chance, it could happen again. And what you're saying is we know that actually that's not likely. And so how do we actually know that? I'm curious, when we look at, is it calculating mass of other galaxies? And I'm curious how we actually can make those determinations.
Well, if you go to reasons.org/fine-tuning, it'll pop up for you a 300-page design feature catalog that we make available freely to the public. And we basically make the point, yes, there could be a trillion planets in the universe. Maybe there's even 100 trillion planets in the universe. That's 26 zeros after the 1. But there's over 1,500 features of our universe, our galaxy, our planetary system, our planet that must be fine-tuned to make our existence possible. And when you go through all the fine-tuning that's necessary, you also go through the overlapping characteristics that have dependency factors, calculate that all that out. You discover, in spite of the fact of the universe having 10 to the 26 planets, even then, there's only 1 chance in 10 to the 1,500 or less that we're going to find any body in the entire universe without invoking divine miraculous intervention that'll have the properties to make our existence possible. So you're basically comparing 26 zeros with 1,500 zeros. And, when I took freshman physics, what the professor said, once you get to 50 zeros, it's impossible.
Interesting. So It's in theory possible, but not likely. Is that a fair?
I'll give you an analogy. It's as possible as you winning the California lottery 1,000 consecutive times, where you buy only one ticket each time. So figure out what that probability is, and the probability of finding a body by natural processes being able to support us, it's more remote than that.
And my luck with the lottery is already lower than most, so that example rings home.
Well, as one mathematician friend of mine put it, the probability is the same as if you buy no tickets at all.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so to recap on that, so the consensus, there's an origin, there's fine tuning that we see. Are there any other concessions that you think are important for those who may not subscribe to theism, but they do say, yes, we know this is a feature and we just can't explain this?
There's major concessions on the origin of life. Our staff biochemist, Fazal Rana, and I, we attend origin of life research conferences that are held here in North America. We've been doing that for over 2 decades. And each successive meeting is more depressing than the previous one because they keep discovering more intractable problems and trying to understand the origin of life from a naturalistic perspective. And so there's been a famous paper written just 2 years ago where they said, we origin of life chemists keep committing the hand to God dilemma. We come up with these amazing synthesis experiments in our laboratories, but they only work if we start with pure chemicals. We control the laboratory situation, and we, with the PhDs and millions of dollars equipment, very carefully control the outcome. So this is never what's going to happen in the real world. What we're doing is committing the hand to God dilemma. We're basically doing what a God would do. We step in, we control, we engineer, we use our intellect, our knowledge, our technology to come up with the outcome that we want. And, this was an atheist writing this article in the British journal Nature. Wow. And our point is someone with a lot more intellect and knowledge and funding than these amazing biochemists must have been responsible for the origin of life in the first place.
So on evolution, I want to parse out what is accepted truth and then what does the science actually show? Because I know sometimes they'll say, well, this is proven. And I know there are some holes. And again, I want to obviously a disclaimer, just because we don't know something now doesn't mean that we couldn't at some point, of course, learn something about that. But right now, and again, I will say I've always enjoyed, even if disagreeing with certain parts and finding his concessions humorous, it was Richard Dawkins. But when I do look at some of the unique relationships, for example, between bees and plants and the plants that are particularly evolved to custom for that animal, it is remarkable to see the variety and the adaptations that happen. But with that said, and the strong evidence that we have for animals changing, et cetera, what are right now, according to the latest science, what are the holes right now in evolution? And we'll get to the kickstart, the abiogenesis, but leaving that aside, what are the holes we have right now? Are there missing tons of gap species, missing, inconsistent fossil? What are the problems we have right now with evolution beyond the causal agent part?
Well, evolutionary biologists will frequently state that there's overwhelming scientific proof that life has evolved on planet Earth. But the definition that they're using of biological evolution is that life started on planet Earth in microbial simple form. And as we go forward in time, life becomes progressively more and more advanced. And I would agree with my atheistic evolutionary biology friends. That definition of evolution indeed is proven beyond any shadow of doubt. But they imply that history of going from simplicity to complexity is naturalistic. And this is where you find the holes. So, for example, you've got paleontologists looking at the Avalon explosion of life 575 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion 538 million years ago. And what they're observing is that the phyla of animals show up first, then the different classes, then the different orders, then the different families, then the different genera, and last of all, the differentiation of species. If you're coming from a naturalistic perspective, you've got four basic mechanisms to change the species over time: natural selection, mutations, gene exchange, and epigenetics. Those are the four mechanisms. Now, people speculated maybe there'd be a fifth, but if there is a fifth, it's responsible for less than 0.1% of the change that we observe. But those four known mechanisms basically predict life will evolve by first getting a proliferation of species, and then over sufficient time, you'll get new genera. Then over more time, the proliferation of genera will produce the families, the proliferation of families will produce the orders, then the classes, and last of all, you'll get the basic body plans of animals, the phyla. But as James Valentine and his colleagues have demonstrated in the scientific literature, and they're coming from a non-theistic perspective, they state, we see the exact opposite. The phyla show up first. We get a differentiation of phyla and a differentiation of classes, then orders, and last of all, we get the differentiation of species. It's the exact opposite of what you'd expect from a naturalistic perspective. And what I've done as an astrophysicist is say, there's another factor here, is that we see the Cambrian explosion appearing at the earliest moment that the chemical conditions on planet Earth would permit those species to appear. Those species need a minimum of 10% oxygen in the atmosphere. The first time Earth's atmosphere hits 10%, you immediately have the Cambrian explosion. There's no time delay. They show up right away. And you actually have more phyla of animals showing up at the Cambrian explosion than exist on planet Earth today. And I've written articles making the point it could well be all the phyla we see on Earth today were fully present at the Cambrian explosion. They used to think the bryozoa came later, but we've now found bryozoa fossils right at the beginning of the Cambrian explosion. We also know the Cambrian event was rapid, more rapid than 412,000 years. So these are some of the challenges. And for me, the most profound challenge of all is what we astronomers call the faint sun paradox. How the sun today is 23% brighter than it was at the time of the origin of life. But we see in the long history of Earth's life is you've got these mass extinction events where 50 to 75 to 95% of the species of life on planet Earth get completely wiped out. But shortly thereafter, you have a mass speciation event where millions of new species now show up on the face of the Earth. But what I've observed as an astronomer, the species that are removed are those that are not very effective at pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. The new species that show up in mass speciation event are species that are more efficient in pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And we see these mass extinction followed by mass speciation events happening about every 35 million years, which is the precise frequency rate you need to compensate for the increasing luminosity of the sun, where a creator steps in, removes life from planet Earth that's no longer appropriate for compensating for the sun's luminosity and replaces it with new life forms that are. My point is this: only a mind that knows the future physics of the Earth, the sun, and the moon would know which species to remove from planet Earth and which new species to replace that removed species with. And this happens dozens of times over the history of life on planet Earth. There must be a mind behind it.
So this is fascinating. So one, I want to go back to when we talk about the inverted order of the appearance of the specialization for species. Can we put that in a practical term? Could we take an animal, for example, and show how what was expected to appear, but what we're actually finding, the classification as far as the classifications, but what we're actually seeing? Is there a way to illustrate that practically with a particular type of chain of animals or a link?
Yeah, I think you're referring to transitional forms. And so the standard non-theistic evolutionary model is that we have these changes in the horse or the whales. And so we see this progression from, say, short-legged horses to long-legged horses. We see it with the whales as well. And I've written a critique on this in my book, More Than a Theory, making the point that what's going to drive transitional forms will be species that have an extremely large population, a short generation time, so they reproduce quickly rather than over a long period of time, simple biochemistry. There's about 8 other factors, but it basically makes the point. If you're appealing to naturalistic processes to explain these fossil record transitions, you'd expect to see them occurring, especially with termites and ants, because they have quadrillions of individuals in their species. Their body sizes are very tiny. They reproduce after just a couple of months. So this is where you'd really expect to see the evidence. And you expect to see it least of all amongst the largest mammals with low population levels, very few progeny per adult, huge body sizes, and whales are in that category. With whales, you're going to have the lowest probability for generating transitional forms. Yet when we look at the fossil record, this is where we see over 50 different species of different kinds of whales over the past 50 million years. And again, I would argue, bring astrophysics into play here, because we notice about the whales as they proliferate they first show up in freshwater regions, then they move into estuaries, then they move into the offshore regions of the continents, then they begin to fill the oceans. But whales have the property that they fertilize the photic zone. They basically fertilize the phytoplankton. And so as the sun is getting brighter and brighter, the proliferation of whales causes a proliferation of phytoplankton, which pulls more and more greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. Today, phytoplankton are responsible for 70% of the greenhouse gases removed from the atmosphere by life. And the sequence of whales that we see over the past 50 million years is exactly what you need to help compensate for the increasing brightness of the sun. Again, this is something you would attribute to a mind that knows what's happening to the sun and knows which whale species to have on Earth at what time, at what abundance level, and what animal sizes.
And just to go back to, so when you were speaking earlier about the kingdom phyla and the appearance of species is appearing it's appearing different than we anticipated. So one, it's happening we would expect it, I'm assuming, in ants and termites just because they get more iterations, right? We would see.
You get a lot more iterations, right?
Right. So you'd see that, but we don't. And we see it in the ones who have way less. I just want to make sure I understood. Is that what we were referring to when we said the phylum was appearing in the wrong order, that we would expect it one way, but it's actually happening another? Is that what we were referring to?
Well, it's 2 different arguments. One, we're seeing the phyla all the way down to the species appearing in the wrong time sequence in the fossil record.
Okay.
So we're seeing the phyla show up all at once. It's not like you get one phyla first and several millions of years later, you get another one, then another one. No, they show up simultaneously. They show up instantly the moment that the chemistry of the Earth permits them to exist. But the second point we're making is the transitions we see in the fossil record are showing up for the wrong species. And so we expect to see them for ants and termites and other insects. We don't expect to see this for horses and whales. And yet the textbook example we see is horses and whales as opposed to the insects.
Interesting. And so also, is there an element of, after these mass extinction events too, that they all show up at once? Is it also a time issue where there's been no time, and what's astounding is that after this mass extinction event, these specialized creatures that seem perfectly fine-tuned, if you will, for that particular era, all show up in mass, and that shouldn't happen unless there was a long period of time and iterations for that to happen. Is that
Well, you do
accurate?
expect a certain passage of time between the mass extinction event and the mass speciation event. Because in most cases, the mass extinction event is a giant asteroid hitting the Earth, igniting volcanic eruptions around the world, poisoning the atmosphere. And so there's going to be a period of time when animals are not going to be able to survive on the Earth, or at least advanced animals. And so, but once the conditions normalize, so for the first time it's possible for those animals to appear, you see a mass extinction event. There's no time delay between when conditions permit their existence and their appearance. And again, you see thousands to millions of species all showing up at the same time. And this happens repeatedly. It's not just once. We literally see this happening about every 30 to 40 million years.
So do you think, I've always wrestled with, if God is real, then, what is the point of the dinosaurs? Is it just a fun, is it letting us play Indiana Jones? Is it, what is the point? But am I correct in surmising from what we're talking about that this is, again, whether or not it could be done in a different way is for a causal agent outside the 11 dimensions to decide. I'm just here for the ride. But is it saying that God provided essentially the right creatures at the right time that were, in a sense, prepping the way for where we are today? Is that a characterization and a plausible role for what the dinosaurs, could have served as a purpose? Because I've always wondered why he would make these, massive creatures that are so mysterious and interesting and then just wipe them out.
Well, the longest creation psalm is Psalm 104. And that psalm basically declares that God packs our planet Earth with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, for as long as possible. And so during the 3 dinosaur eras, we have these vast shallow seas over the continents, which for the first time makes possible huge land animals. Today, the largest land animal you can have on the face of the earth is an elephant. Anything bigger than that, it's going to find itself being injured by the consequences of the law of gravity. However, if you've got water support, the buoyancy of the water can permit a much bigger animal. And so, for example, whales weigh 200 tons, but that's because they take advantage of the water buoyancy. Well, with these shallow seas that are like 10 to 20 feet deep, that means you can have these gigantic dinosaurs walking around on the land, but taking advantage of the water to support their massive bodies. And once those shallow seas go away, no more dinosaurs. You can't have dinosaurs today. The laws of physics wouldn't permit them to exist without these gigantic shallow seas. And you see Psalm 104 closing off with this comment. It's a property of all life to die off, but God recreates and renews the face of the earth. He's recreating to ensure that our planet is always packed with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, for as long as possible. Why? So that when we human beings come upon the terrestrial scene at the end of the window of time for life to exist on planet Earth, we have a rich treasure chest of 76 quadrillion tons of biodeposits, limestone, coal, oil, natural gas, marble, metals that have been concentrated by bacterial activity. So we're the beneficiaries of all this past life on planet Earth. And guess what? Without those biodeposits, we wouldn't be able to launch and sustain global high technology civilization. Wow. So I thank God that God created the dinosaurs, because they contributed to the biodeposits that make my standard of living possible.
That's right. Well, good. If you watch Jurassic Park, then you can feel an extra level of another dimension of emotion there. Also, real quick, is it true that these asteroids deposited minerals as well, or these impacts push certain things to the surface? I've heard that there's some geological benefits that we obtained from obviously not being around during deep impact, but that those things actually helped as well.
Yeah, I mean. We live in a solar system that has unique comet and asteroid belts. As we look at other star systems, their asteroid and comet belts are either 1,000 times bigger than ours, or they don't have any at all. And we now know the reasons why. But for example, if our asteroid and comet belts were 1,000 times bigger, we'd be bombarded all the time. We wouldn't be able to build cities. We'd be bombarded too much. On the other hand, we need some bombardment. So, for example, our planet loses a tiny amount of water every year, but the water we lose to interplanetary space is replaced by the water we gain from comets. Comets are 85% frozen water.
Wow.
So water on planet Earth is stable. But we also get the benefit of an occasional hit from one of these heavy metal dominant asteroids. So, for example, 80% of the gold and platinum in circulation today is thanks to an asteroid that struck just outside Johannesburg. 50% of the nickel in circulation today in our economy comes from an asteroid that hit Sudbury, Ontario. And so
Wow.
An occasional collision like that helps. And I just wrote a book designed at the core where I make the point. The way the Earth and the moon are designed, with the mass of the moon, the orbit of the moon actually acts as a funnel to blow away the light element asteroids, so we don't get too many of those, but funnels in the really valuable asteroids, the ones that are made up of these valuable heavy metals, and ensures that we get enough of those being delivered to the Earth that we can take advantage of that to sustain our high technology civilization. And believe it or not, NASA's got their eyes on an asteroid in the asteroid belt that they value at $50 quadrillion because of the enormous quantity of gold and platinum and osmium that exists in that particular asteroid. And they're actually working on plans. How can we pull that asteroid into a lunar orbit and begin to mine it so we can
Wow.
So, I mean,
that sounds like a blockbuster film. I see. We can't be the only country that's laid eyes on that. So I see a space race coming for. I've actually thought about that. I got to imagine we're going to go back to the moon. I know we're mining for new stuff up there. I have a friend who works in that space and said, no pun intended, and says that there's going to be renewed attention for these extraterrestrial mineral deposits and stuff. So that's if you have a good in or a good asteroid guy, let me know, because I'd love to get in on together. As I wrap up here on evolution, et cetera, and fine tuning, I just want to say, is there all the things that we've laid out from the species differentiation issues, the mass extinctions, all these things that basically summarize, it seems like the Earth was being just groomed for us and for us to reap the benefits of, to for lack of a better term. Is that something that there's the consensus is on? Like even the antagonistic to faith scholars would say yes. Like it is very interesting. Like they would say, yeah, I don't know why that happens, but it's just, we just don't know. We don't know why these inverted appearance of these species. It is awfully coincidental that these mass extinction events, is that sort of what they would say?
Well, those that are doing the interdisciplinary research are drawing those conclusions. The problem is a lot of my peers are hyper specialized. They only do genetics or they only do paleontology. But my peers are saying, well, if we really want to understand this, we need to integrate genetics with paleontology, with geology, with astrophysics. And when you do that, then suddenly the evidence screams out at you, no, this has all been very carefully designed by someone who's way more intelligent and way more powerfully equipped than we human beings. I'll give you an example. NASA, for example, on their website is basically saying, we are on a quest to find an Earth-like planet that could possibly sustain life, the quest for a habitable planet. But all they're looking at is a planet that exists in what's called the liquid water habitable zone, the distance from a star where liquid water could conceivably exist on the surface of that planet. But if you look at the scientific literature, we now know of 14 distinct planetary habitable zones simultaneously reside in the liquid water habitable zone and the ultraviolet habitable zone. And of these 14 known planetary, we've discovered 14 so far. We seem to be picking up one every year. But of all the planets that we discovered, and there's now 5,300 that we know of, we've yet to find one besides planet Earth that exists in even 3 of the 14 known planetary habitable zones.
So bottom line is keep looking because we haven't found it.
Bottom line, we better take care of planet Earth because there's nowhere else to go.
Sorry, Elon. I know Mars is too cold, right? I mean, we got a lot of issues with Mars. It's also close, which I guess that's its main benefit. It's adjacent property for us, relatively speaking. But it's cold, not enough oxygen, right? And also it seems pretty bland. I love the red rocks, but I feel like Mars's topography would get old after a while. So,
well, it's got 60 times as much sulfur in its soil than we have here on planet Earth. You're not going to be able to grow anything on Martian soil. There's nothing to stop radiation from the sun and the cosmos from coming into the surface of Mars. If you want to live on Mars, you better live 50 feet underground, because on the surface, you're going to get zapped. And on a trip from Earth to Mars, unless you're traveling there in a spaceship that's about the size of our moon, you're going to be having a problem with gravity. You're going to be having a problem with radiation exposure. And so NASA and other people are gradually coming to the recognition we're not going to be able to get people to Mars in any kind of state where they can function. And even if we got onto Mars, they're not going to live more than a few months. And as a scientist, I would say there's no reason to send people to Mars. Machines can do the job for a very tiny fraction of the price and much faster. We can get much more science. So if science is our objective, keep the astronauts at home, send the machines. That's also true of the moon. I know a lot of nations want to send people back to the moon, and there I'm a little more optimistic because Earth's magnetosphere protects you half of the way there. And as long as you only stay in the moon for a few days, you can bring the astronauts safely back home. But the truth is, if you want to learn about the moon, we can do everything we want to do with machines for a whole lot less money.
Well, there you go. Man, I gotta get into my other stuff here, but I'm so enjoying geeking out. I'm really hoping, I don't think they're going to do this, but I've always been fascinated with Venus. I feel like Mars gets all the love, and Venus I know has a lot of problems too and completely inhospitable. But if I recall correctly, our landing craft was damaged, right? And we only had a few minutes of. I would love to know what the surface of Venus looks like with our modern technology, but if I recall, it was damaged and it's too hot, and it basically stopped working within a few minutes, right?
Well, we have mapped the surface of Venus using radar, so we got a good idea what the surface of Venus is like. We do know it's extremely hot on the surface of Venus, but what's attracting some astronomers, 60 kilometers up in the atmosphere, you got the air pressure and the temperature that you have at the surface of the Earth. And so everywhere we've looked within our galaxy, the most Earth-like conditions we've been able to find are in the upper atmosphere of Venus, a lot better than what you find on Mars. However, you still got the problem that there's a lot of sulfuric acid in the Venus's atmosphere. So people have been speculating maybe a microbe from Earth got transported to Venus, riding on a meteorite. And in that case, there are people thinking we might be able to find the remains of Earth life 60 kilometers up in the atmosphere, but it will be the remains because the conditions there are deadly even for microbes.
So Venus is off the table too. So we'll take care of this planet. Gosh, I could talk to you about this all day. I definitely have to get your thoughts on Interstellar next time. I want to move to transdimension.
I like Interstellar, by the way.
Isn't it fantastic?
Interstellar, it's science fiction, but all the equations that you see in the background, they're all correct.
Oh, I love that. See, and also, right? And I thought, obviously the idea of trying to conceptualize beyond what a black hole would be like, but I love that they engaged actual scientists, and it just popularizes, and Andy Weir does a great job as well with The Martian, and his new one, Hail Mary Project, is fantastic. But I love when they make science enjoyable, because that scene in the movie that truly moved me and astounded me was when they showed the effects of relativity and someone missing that wave that hit their craft by 15 minutes delayed 2 years up in the atmosphere of that massive gargantuan planet and illustrating gravity and time relationship, that was mind-boggling to me. I mean, the guy had aged like 10 years because they were gone for 15 minutes more on that planet. Just fascinating.
Well, they hired Kip Thorne from Caltech as their consultant, and he was the one that ensured that all the equations were correct, even if the science was impossible.
Man, but that is something that would happen, right? There's a planet of that much mass. If someone was in orbit and someone actually on the planet, assuming they could make it down there, is that a feasible scenario that someone could, miss a window by 15 minutes and then by gravity and time, the people in orbit would age, or off the planet would age?
Well, in that
more?
movie, they had got all the time dilation correct.
Okay, that's with time dilation.
What was incorrect is that people could actually survive those kinds of physical conditions. They couldn't. But at least the time dilation part was correct.
Okay, so that is a thing. So assuming you could survive that, I could miss something by 10, I could miss a bus for 10 minutes on one area, and with time dilation, given the gravity, someone else could age 4 years, 5 years.
Well, for example, you could send your wife to the Andromeda Galaxy at 99% the velocity of light. She'd be able to get there in just a few years and come back. But when she comes back, she would be about 40 years older, and you would be about 5 million years older.
So that's one way to fix the age gap, or if you want to date younger, I guess that's one way to interstellar dating. We'll have to get on that. Well, as we wrap up here, I want to dig in a little bit just for a few minutes into, I love transdimensionality of God, just thinking through the idea and the concepts of multiple dimensions. First off, I want to correct a misnomer if I'm saying this incorrectly. I have been saying that I am a three-dimensional being stuck in four dimensions that I can perceive. Is that a misnomer, or is that accurate? Because I know I'm in time
Yeah, time is a dimension. So we live in 3 space dimensions plus 1 time dimension.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's 4 space-time dimensions. And these are the big dimensions. But we now know that to understand the cosmic creation event and how it's consistent with a particle creation event, the universe must have 6 more dimensions of space, but 6 that are extremely tiny. So the picture of the universe, it begins with 9 dimensions of space that all rapidly expand from the cosmic creation event. But at 10 to the minus 43 seconds after the cosmic creation event, 6 of those 9 dimensions stop expanding, and the other 3 continue to expand. And so wrapped around the 3 gigantic dimensions are 6 extremely tiny dimensions. And you can think of it as taking a piece of paper and wrapping it very tightly around a pencil. If the pencil is infinitely thin, that sheet of paper is going to look like a single dimension. But the truth is, if you look at the scroll, it really has 2 dimensions. And the physicists have been able to determine what is the cross-section of those dimensional scrolls that are wrapped around the 3 big ones. And the answer is they're 20 orders of magnitude. That is 10 billion trillion times smaller than the diameter of an electron, which is why until recently nobody really paid attention to 6 extra dimensions, but they're crucial to integrate our cosmic creation model with our particle creation model.
Wow. So just so I understand what you said to make sure I get it. So if I have this piece of paper and I draw a flat line on it, I could say, all right, that's 1 dimension there. But assuming it was a marker or some sort of ink that is indiscernibly above the paper, it actually is another dimension on there, even though it appears to be 1. Is that an
analogy I could give you? Take a sheet of paper and then roll it up very tightly as a scroll. If you roll it up tightly enough, most people will think it's just a single line. So that's how you can make 2 dimensions appear like it's only 1 dimension.
Got it. Okay. So one thing that I was astounded to learn that there are at least 11, and these are these, I would say proven's the word, but these are conceived dimensions based on our models? Is that the correct nomenclature?
Well, we don't have the capability of measuring these 6 very tiny space dimensions, but we know they're necessary to have gravity, quantum mechanics, our particle creation model, and our cosmic creation model to all be self-consistent so life is possible. So theoretically, no one really denies that these extra dimensions exist. And so for a universe, it's a single time dimension where time goes forward. It can only go forward, and then 9 dimensions of space. But the space-time theorems establish that there must be a causal agent beyond these 9 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And so that would require, at a minimum, the equivalent of at least an extra dimension, maybe a whole lot of extra dimensions beyond the 10 space-time dimensions of our universe. And as I've written in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, the creator may be operating with something that's got nothing to do with dimensions at all, but it is a creator that's got the power to create space-time dimensions at will and to remove them at will. So in creating the universe, the creator spontaneously created 10 space-time dimensions.
So this next is a 2-part question, because I wanted to ask you about the concept in Christian theology. There's this, there's debates about free will and sovereignty and prayer and foreknowledge and all this stuff. And after reading your book, I feel like I said, well, you get beyond the dimensions that I understand, and it's yes, like I'm thinking way too binary. It could be like, so I'd love, from a first standpoint, to visualize something. We draw a line, 1 dimension, we add some depth or whatever, we get multiple. Is it possible to give me an illustrative model for what a person or entity living outside of time might visualize ours, and then maybe 1 level out? Is there any way to visualize these conceived dimensions?
Well, when I was a university student, I took a course on extra-dimensional mathematics. And one of the things the professor said is, you cannot visualize phenomena in dimensions you don't personally experience, but you can mathematically prove what's possible, not possible in those extra dimensions. So he says, tip number 1, don't try to visualize any of the problem assignments I'm giving you. It can't be done. And one example he gave us was, consider a basketball. If you got 4 dimensions of space, you can turn that basketball inside out without making a cut or a hole in the surface of the basketball. And he actually gave us the assignment to prove that mathematically, which we were able to do. But he said none of us could visualize it. But what he did is he showed us a video clip of this basketball being turned inside out, where we saw it 2 dimensions at a time. So you got one 2-dimensional clip and a very different 2-dimensional clip, basically showing you, hey, this really does happen. Now, this is a big factor in my becoming a follower of Jesus Christ, because I was not raised in a Christian home, but in my late teenage years, I studied the different religions of the world, and I noticed, with the exception of the Bible, all the world's holy books in which the religions are based, put God in a 4-dimensional box. Their doctrines were what you could conceive of in length, width, height, and time. But when it picked at the Bible, it described God as a triune being, 3 persons, but only 1 essence. It described how God gave us free will and holds us responsible for our free will decisions and actions and thoughts that we make. Yet the Bible also says that God predetermined all our words, thoughts, and actions before he created the universe. These are all paradoxes that have no possible resolution if all you got is length, width, height, and time. But in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, I made the point. If we allow God to be as big as what the new physics tells us he must be, not constrained to 4 space-time dimensions, but with a power to move and operate in multiple dimensions of space and time, there are resolutions to all of these biblical statements. But what it showed me as a young man, this book we call the Bible must have come from a being that transcends our space-time dimensions, because it's filled with content that only makes sense if it's from a being that can move and operate in dimensions beyond what we humans experience.
Yeah.
So looked at the Vedas and all these other books I'm saying, they have the characteristic of being invented by a being that's constrained to our space-time dimensions.
Because essentially, I know, like, they try to, obviously, in Interstellar with the Tesseract, like, make some, illustrations, but for a being that lives outside the confines of these dimensions, it's foreseeable that, and one iteration could be right, that they with no effort at all could see every outcome, every, like this massive array of all these options, and know like knowledge of what you were going to do all the way to, and like see it in the same way I see a piece of paper and can draw a line, that they
Sure.
see all possible outcomes of all iterations at any moment in time, which sounds mind blowing, and it is. But if that's true, then debating whether or not God knew you were going to pray something before you did almost seems like a exercise in. I really did. It felt like wow. I get into all these debates about sovereignty and did he know or whatever, and I go, that feels like a human being now just trying to like argue with the limited tools I have. And when you get outside that, it feels like the answers could be yes, 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 and yeah. Did he know? Absolutely, absolutely. Did I have a choice? Absolutely. What? Like.
Well, like one illustration I put in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, is to say, consider a sphere of time where time is three-dimensional. And you could put the timeline of your human life along, say, a latitude of that sphere of time. You could put God at the North Pole of that sphere of time, and he can draw perpendicular timelines to every moment of your life. And guess what? All those timelines meet at a single instant of time, basically demonstrating in three independent dimensions of time, God from one moment of time can simultaneously operate on the entirety of your lifespan, for that matter, on the entirety of the lifespan of our universe. So it's a way of showing the capability of the divine creator. And incidentally, we're giving away a free chapter of that book at reasons.org/Ross. Anybody can get, I think the chapter we're giving away is the one on free will and predestination. So if you want to see how all that works out, reasons.org/Ross.
Oh man, that's awesome. So maybe when Paul was taken up to a vision of heaven, do you think Paul got a little taste of leaving the four dimensions? Do you think Paul got to catch a glance?
Because he made the point, I was taken to the third heaven. And the Hebrew word for heaven has three distinct definitions. It can refer to the troposphere where rain clouds form. It can refer to the universe as stars and galaxies. The third heaven is the realm beyond the universe, beyond the space-time dimensions of the universe, where the angels operate, where God can operate. So he's basically saying, I was taken completely outside of this universe into a different dimensional realm.
Wow. Well, I think I've got I don't know. There's got to be some concept where every question leads to another question. So I've just got. I know many have experienced this with you. So I'll have to come back and visit you in your cool sauna-looking studio. But I'd like just one final question on a personal note here. As you studied all this and wrap your mind around these dimensions, etc., and it sounds like it only grows you in awe of what God could be. If this God is real, then this is like far beyond anything we could understand. How does that affect something personal to a Christian, like say your prayer life? Do you find yourself stepping outside of it for a minute and being like, wow, I'm praying, and as someone who studies interdimensional or extra dimensional physics, which I somehow missed in my coursework, how does that affect your own personal? Does it make you actually have more faith, or do you smile and go, you already know I'm praying this? I'm curious if that has any effect on your personal relationship with God.
It definitely does, because it means that when I'm praying to a being that's outside of the space-time dimensions of the universe, who has the power to use his trans-dimensional powers to influence events here on Earth. So as I share with a lot of audiences, prayer is the most powerful tool God has given us. It allows you to impact anybody's life anywhere in the world with the power from a being that transcends the entirety of the universe and all of its space-time dimensions. It's the reason why God has put restrictions in the Bible on our use of prayer. It's such an incredibly powerful tool. He basically says, use it this way, don't use it this way. And so we need to be careful how we pray.
Wow. Well, you heard it there, folks. Pray. Dr. Ross, this has been so fun. I want to respect your time because unfortunately you and I do live in that dimension. And until we're outside of it, we'll have plenty of time to talk out once we get outside these dimensions. But anything else you'd like to plug or mention? And we'll make sure to get all the links and post and everything, or any project you'd like to discuss.
Well, I just want to share with your viewers that it's a privilege to be alive in the 21st century. God has given us two books, the book of scripture and the book of nature. In the 21st century, the book of nature is exploding. I mean, as it says in the book of Daniel, in the last days, knowledge will exponentially increase. I think we're living in those days. My own discipline of astrophysics, the knowledge base doubles every 5 years.
Wow.
Which means we have the privilege of seeing more and more evidence for God being revealed on a daily basis through the latest scientific research. As I speak to audiences in universities, audiences of skeptics, I tell them, if you're not convinced today, wait 1 month. What I've seen over the past 40 years, with every month that goes by, the scientific evidence we have for God designing this universe and our solar system for our specific benefit so we can fulfill the purpose for which God created us. At a minimum, that evidence gets 1,000 times stronger every month. So if you're not convinced today, wait a month. If the evidence is 1,000 times stronger, perhaps you should seriously consider the claims on your life that are written in God's holy book, the Bible.
Well, that's as good a plug as I've heard. And I appreciate that. I did want to say, I listened to an interview with you and you were debating, I think he was a chemist. It was on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable, but he made an astounding claim. He said, I think if I saw something, I would assume I've gone insane. And both you and Justin said, so is there any evidence that you would accept? And he said, I don't think so. And it was an astounding statement to me. And I thought, isn't the point of science to just say, go where the evidence goes? Because
It's astounding because for an entire hour, Peter Atkins was berating me saying, you have to base your life on hard scientific evidence. Go where the evidence leads, which I was perfectly willing to do. I said, hey, if you can give me scientific evidence that my Christian faith is not true, I'll abandon my Christianity. But then we turned the tables on him and said, Peter, is there anything that scientists could possibly discover that would cause you to change your beliefs? And the irony was, for a whole hour, he was basically contradicting himself and saying, no, I won't do it. So it's a dramatic debate. You can watch it for free on YouTube. Peter Atkins versus Hugh Ross.
Your patience was, that is a comment that many people, even those who disagree with you, I really respect that. People who may disagree with, your interpretation of Genesis or progressive evolution, I find the consistent remark is Dr. Ross is incredibly patient and his opponents exploit that. They just tend to talk themselves in. But it was an astounding statement because I thought that's the whole point of science is we need to follow the evidence. And I'm constantly trying to ask myself, where does this point and how can I, and I think if the God of the Bible is true, he seems to be the one who led us to be reasonable and to use our minds and to inquire. And obviously faith, we run into faith at some point. We have to, but nowhere are we commanded to, discard our faculties and study that. So
I know you're a comedian. People have asked me, well, Hugh, what's your strategy when you're debating these angry atheists and people who disagree with you theologically? So sometimes the best strategy, let your opponent talk.
Well, that's Napoleon's quote, right? Don't interrupt your opponent when he's making a mistake. So it was an astounding. I heard it this morning. I said, prepping for this, he said, I don't think there's any evidence I would accept. And I thought, what are we debating? This is astounding. And then it's the same line of logic that I really struggle with. If we can only trust our five senses, if that's what's scientifically measurable is all that's true, then what do we do with things like thoughts? That I know you have them, I have them. I don't know if you can prove them in the dimensions and senses that you want to, but and that discards love and all these other things. It seems like we all recognize we're not beholden to just naturalistic causes. But even if that is the case, how could we trust our faculties? And I find that many people who say you can't trust your faculties, they're all too willing to trust their own in making that that recommendation.
Right. Yeah, in that sense, it's self-defeating.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Ross, thank you for camping with us remotely. I do hope you'll have us into your. Did you wear your hat for the viewers? I don't know if you got to sport. Got to keep that brain protected, you know?
There we go.
Look at that. Okay. So, folks, if you would like to leave the fourth dimension and go read Dr. Ross's book, please pick. You can pick any of them. If you see a copy of Transdimensionality of God at the airport, don't walk by. It's not intimidating. It's actually really good, as are all his other books. So pick them up, learn some things, go read the free 300-page paper. I know I will. And we've been camping with Dr. Hugh Ross. Thanks for joining us, sir. I'll stop that. That was